Something Lynda Randle said recently has stayed with everyone in the gospel music world who heard it. Not because it was a song, or a performance, or an announcement of any kind, but because it was about her family, about a season when they had nowhere left to turn, and about the person who showed up before they had even finished figuring out how to ask. That person was Bill Gaither. And what Bill did, he did without a single word to anyone outside that circle. No statement, no recognition, nothing that would have told the gospel community it had even happened. The Randle family carried it quietly for years. Lynda finally said it out loud, and when she did, she couldn't get through it without breaking down. Not from grief, but from the kind of gratitude that builds up over time until holding it becomes harder than releasing it. Stay with us, because what Lynda revealed, and the reason this family stayed silent about it for so long, tells you everything you need to know about who Bill Gaither actually is. Beneath the songs and the stages and the homecoming videos that have shaped American Christian music for more than 3 decades. What comes out at the 10-minute mark is the part of this story that the gospel community has almost never heard said plainly. If you found your way into the Gaither Homecoming world through the videos, the concerts, or a late Sunday afternoon when one of those specials came on television and you just stayed, chances are Lynda Randle's voice was one of the first things that made you stop. There's an authority in her singing that goes somewhere beyond technique, a settled weight, as if every note has already been through something real and come out the other side stronger for it. Growing up in Washington, D.C., in a household where faith was genuine and circumstances were hard, Lynda built a foundation long before the gospel music community ever knew her name. Her brother, Michael Tate, who became one of the defining voices of Christian music, first with DC Talk and then with the Newsboys, came out of that same family, and anyone who knows his story understands something about what the Randle household produced. Artists whose faith runs bone deep because life required it to. Her signature song in the homecoming world, God on the Mountain, became something close to a standard, and the reason isn't complicated. Lynda doesn't perform that song so much as she inhabits it, and the millions of believers who have watched those homecoming videos on a Sunday afternoon or sat in a concert hall when she stepped to the microphone understood immediately that she was singing from a place inside herself, not from a stage persona. Bill Gaither recognized that quality early, and bringing her into the homecoming family was one of those decisions that looks obvious only because of how right it turned out to be. For those of us who have followed the homecoming story since those first videos went out in 1991, watching this extended family of Christian music grow has been one of the ongoing gifts of faith-based community. Within that family, certain relationships carry a depth that goes beyond professional connection. And what Lynda's revelation confirms is that her family's bond with Bill Gaither belongs in that category completely. Here's what separates this story from the kind of tribute you hear at an awards ceremony or a farewell concert. Lynda wasn't delivering a prepared speech, wasn't reading from notes, wasn't framing a moment for effect. The story came out the way things come out when someone is speaking from genuine emotion, when the feeling rises before the filter has time to engage, and the words arrive before you've decided whether to hold them back. The Gaither Homecoming community has always had that quality about it, the informality of those gatherings, the atmosphere Bill creates where honesty costs less than performance. Russ Taff talked about his addiction in those settings before he talked about it anywhere else. Mark Lowry said things that surprised even the people who thought they knew him. David Phelps got emotional about his family and his calling in ways that caught him off guard in front of a room full of people. Lynda, in that same spirit, said something she had carried privately for a long time. The season she described was one of genuine need for the Randle family, the kind of situation where pride makes asking nearly impossible, and circumstances make going without equally impossible. What the family was navigating in specific terms matters far less than what happened when the need became known. And what happened was Bill Gaither. The detail that sent Lynda's voice breaking in the middle of a sentence was this: Bill didn't make it a moment. No benefit, no gathering of homecoming artists to pool resources, none of the things that would have transformed the Randle family's private need into a story that others would carry and tell. He found out what was needed, and he met it, quietly, in a way that left the family's dignity exactly where he found it. Now, for those of you who have followed Bill Gaither's ministry across the decades, this kind of response may not shock you entirely. The man who wrote "Because He Lives" and "He Touched Me" alongside his wife Gloria has always understood something about what faith looks like when it stops being a lyric and becomes an action. But knowing that about someone in the abstract, and then hearing a specific family describe a specific moment when it landed in their lives, those are two entirely different things. And Lynda's words made it specific in a way that nothing general ever could. And what she said next, about what that moment meant for her family's faith in the months that followed, is the part of this story that most people still haven't heard. And this is where the story turns in a way that even longtime homecoming fans weren't expecting. When Lynda finally got through the emotion enough to describe what Bill had done, what she communicated wasn't just the act itself, but the manner of it. And in the community of faith, the manner matters as much as the deed. Bill had stepped in during a time of real family need, provided support in a way that asked nothing in return, no public acknowledgement, no story to carry forward, no credit of any kind. The help came because the need existed, and because he was positioned to meet it. And that was the entire equation from his side of it. For a man whose name belongs to some of the most beloved songs in the history of American gospel music, who has produced more than 70 homecoming videos, who helped launch and, in some cases, restore the careers of artists ranging from Guy Penrod to Michael English to Wes Hampton, the idea that his private behavior runs on the same track as his public one is not a small claim. There are people in Christian music, as in every field, whose public faith and private conduct point in different directions. According to Lynda Randle, Bill Gaither is not one of them. What she conveyed, through tears, was something close to this. Her family had been in a place where the path forward wasn't visible, and Bill found out, and before the family had time to determine what to do next, the need was gone. Quietly, completely, without announcement. The gospel community's response, as word of this began to spread, carried a particular warmth, because it confirmed something that fellow artists have suggested across many years without quite saying it directly. Guy Penrod, who served as lead vocalist of the Gaither vocal band for years, has described Bill as someone whose generosity operates in the register of genuine faith rather than public performance. David Phelps, whose tenor voice became one of the defining sounds of the vocal band era, has spoken about the way Bill creates an environment where people feel genuinely valued rather than professionally useful. What Lynda described fits inside that picture without a gap. There's also a particular resonance in the fact that it was Lynda who said this out loud. She doesn't speak carelessly, and her faith testimony, shaped by a childhood that required real trust in God long before it required anything else, gives her words a weight that her fellow artists recognize. When Lynda Randle breaks down talking about someone's character, the people in that room understand she means every word of it. For the millions of believers who have watched the homecoming videos, who have seen the way that community gathers around its members in filming sessions and on concert stages, this moment offered something that television rarely delivers: actual evidence that the love visible in those gatherings is not a production decision. It runs underneath the music, through the relationships, into the private moments where the cameras have gone home and the need is real, and the response reveals who someone actually is. What Bill Gaither's response told the Randle family, without a single sermon or formal statement of intent, is that the God on the mountain that Lynda has been singing about all these years does show up through people, through the quiet, unremarked generosity of someone who understood that faith without works is something less than complete. For those of us who have followed Lynda's journey through the years, through every homecoming video she's appeared in, through the concerts and the television specials and the recordings that have carried her voice into so many living rooms and church sanctuaries, this revelation lands somewhere specific. It lands in that place where you realize that what drew you to these artists in the first place wasn't only the music. It was the sense that they were the real thing. The Gaither Homecoming world has given Christian music something the mainstream industry has rarely produced with the same consistency. A community of artists whose faith appears to function the same way off the stage as on it. Not without struggle, because these gatherings have included honest testimony about struggle, about addiction and failure and loss and doubt, but genuinely, in a way that holds up across decades of watching. What this story tells us, in the broader context of gospel music and Christian community today, is something that believers have always known in principle and sometimes forget in practice. That the most important acts of faith are the ones with no audience, the ones that cost something real and ask for nothing back. Lynda's willingness to finally tell this story, even through tears, is itself an act of faith, because it required setting aside years of privacy and saying publicly that someone loved her family well during a moment that mattered most. That kind of testimony is harder to give than a concert performance. It asks more of the person giving it. If you have been a fan of Lynda Randle since the early homecoming days, if you have watched her sing God on the Mountain in those settings where an entire room goes still, you already know what we mean when we say her voice carries something that no amount of training produces on its own. Now you know a little more about where that depth comes from. There's one more part of this story that most people haven't connected yet, and it matters for understanding how consistent this pattern of quiet generosity has been across the full history of the Gaither Homecoming family. Michael English's story is one the homecoming community knows in its outlines, at least. In the mid-1990s, when his career collapsed after personal failure and the Christian music industry largely stepped back, Bill Gaither did not step back with them. He waited, and when the time came, he brought Michael back into the homecoming circle. Not through a public statement of restoration or a formal forgiveness ceremony, but simply by including him again, by offering the gift of belonging to someone who had every reason to believe he'd lost it for good. Russ Taff's story carries the same thread. During the years of his struggle with alcohol, long before he spoke about it publicly, there were people in his life who knew and stayed, and people who knew and created distance. Bill Gaither stayed. What these stories share with what Lynda revealed is not simply Bill's name. What they share is the manner, the absence of performance, the presence of practical love, the decision to help in a way that requires nothing from the recipient except the willingness to receive it. That pattern, repeated across decades and across the very different lives and circumstances of the homecoming artists, begins to look less like individual acts of kindness and more like a settled way of moving through the world. Gloria Gaither, Bill's partner in ministry and in life since 1962, has written and spoken about what it means to build something that outlasts the moment it was built in, and the conclusion she and Bill have lived out across thousands of songs, hundreds of events, and now generations of gospel music, is that the thing which lasts is love that doesn't wait to be noticed. The songs say it, and according to Lynda Randle, the life says it in ways the songs haven't even reached yet. What happens next for Lynda Randle and for this story is something the gospel community will be watching with genuine care. Because when a testimony this personal reaches the public, it tends to open doors that have been held quietly shut. Other artists may find the courage to share what they have experienced privately. Other families who have been on the receiving end of Bill Gaither's quiet generosity, or the broader homecoming families, may find their own moment to say so. What lingers after hearing what Lynda said is a question that doesn't resolve into a neat conclusion. In a culture that rewards the public gesture over the private one, the act that photographs over the act that costs, there is something worth sitting with in the fact that one of the most important things Bill Gaither ever did for a family almost never became a story at all. It almost stayed exactly what it was meant to be: a kindness between a man of faith and a family he loved, known only to the people in that room. And then Lynda Randle, through tears, decided the world should finally know. Whatever comes next, the fans who have followed this ministry for decades already understand what that moment confirms. Bill Gaither's story, and the story of the community he and Gloria built around the living tradition of American gospel music, is not finished. There are still songs to sing, still families to love, and still quiet acts of grace happening in places where no camera will ever go. If this story moved you, the next video will as well. We have been covering the remarkable and largely untold journey of another family within the homecoming circle, and what came out of that situation is every bit as unexpected and every bit as honest as what you heard today.